federal judge is set to rule very soon on the future of the Immigration Detention Center in Florida, called by some Alligator Alcatraz. An environmental group and Native American tribes sued over concerns that facility would, or probably already has, in their view, harmed the surrounding Everglades.
Everyone knows about the famous 1962 Alcatraz escape. But what they don't know is what investigators found when they retraced the exact route in 2025. Using advanced scanning technology, they discovered something that changed everything about that night.
The same things that made Alligator Alcatraz appealing to the governor, its remote location, its airstrip, and it being surrounded by alligators, are what made it unacceptable to a judge.
Hidden behind the cell walls wasn't just a utility corridor. It was connected to a network of sealed chambers that had been forgotten since the 1800s. Inside one of these rooms, they found items that shouldn't exist. Uniforms from different decades, tools that looked like torture devices, and most disturbing of all, evidence that the escapees might not have been the first to use these hidden passages.
The Everglades, as we all know, is one of the most unique and fragile ecosystems in the world, and the entire state of Florida is reliant on a healthy Everglades.
Alcatraz didn't start as a prison. Long before its cells echoed with the footsteps of famous criminals, the island was a fortress. Back in 1850, President Millard Fillmore ordered the military to claim the rocky outcrop for coastal defense. By 1853, engineers began carving into the island, turning it into a fortified military post. By 1858, Fort Alcatraz stood complete, armed with over 100 cannons. But what made it different from other forts were the hidden chambers. Beneath the surface, deep underground, the Army had built bomb-proof gunpowder vaults meant to survive explosions. As time passed, these underground magazines were simply forgotten. When the island was converted into a federal prison in the 1930s, the massive concrete cell blocks were poured directly on top of the old military remains. Thick slabs of cement buried the original citadel. By the time Alcatraz officially opened as a prison in 1934, hardly anyone remembered what was hidden beneath their feet. But the sealed rooms were still there. These underground vaults were first carved during the Civil War. Back then, the fort's design included earth-covered tunnels and vaulted ammunition chambers. Some were used, some were never finished, and others were just left behind when the military lost interest in upgrading the fort in the 1870s. These buried rooms didn't just vanish. They were entombed. For decades, nobody touched them. Then came a breakthrough. In 2014, researchers scanned beneath the recreation yard with ground-penetrating radar. What they found shocked everyone. Just under the surface, only a few centimeters below the concrete, were the brick-lined remains of a bomb-proof traverse tunnel from the 1860s, still intact after 150 years. Archaeologist Timothy DeSmet described his disbelief at how shallow they were. You could have been standing on history and never known it. These were not just cold, empty rooms. During the Civil War, soldiers stationed on the island had already been uneasy. Some said they heard strange echoes from the powder tunnels at night, footsteps when no one was there, faint whispers or cries coming from the walls. The tunnel vents had a way of carrying sounds, and some believed the place was haunted. One rumor from the 1860s claimed a worker was buried alive during a cave-in and that his screams never stopped echoing underground. Officially, no such death was recorded, but the stories lingered. Guards would sometimes refuse to go down alone. They whispered about ghostly moans and men who never came back from patrol. By the time of the Spanish-American War in 1898, Alcatraz had become a full military prison. The inmate population exploded almost overnight, from just 26 to over 450. With the official jail cells overflowing, guards started using the old storage tunnels as makeshift holding pens. Prisoners were thrown into these pitch-black chambers buried under the island. Some of them wrote desperate messages on the brick walls, names, prayers, final goodbyes. These writings remained hidden for over 100 years. Then, in 2019, archaeologists returned with scanners and uncovered those same tunnels. They found scratched graffiti on the walls in Spanish and English. One haunting inscription, dated 1898, read, "Dios me abandona? God, have you forsaken me?" Next to it were tally marks counting off the days. Another just said, "Adios mis hijos? Goodbye, my children." These weren't just markings, they were cries from the past, sealed inside rooms no one had entered for generations. Nature itself sealed some chambers for good. On April 18, 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake shook the entire Bay Area. The main fortress buildings on Alcatraz held up, but several old tunnels and brick casemates collapsed. A communication tunnel built in the 1870s was buried. Another entry passage near the main gate caved in. The Army didn't try to fix them. They just walled them off and walked away. Some of those sealed tunnels still held supplies, tools, gear, possibly even weapons. According to later park records, nothing was ever retrieved. And there were whispers that some guards went missing in the quake and were never seen again. Maybe they ran. Maybe they were trapped under the rubble. No bodies were found, but the idea took root. People imagined bones buried under Alcatraz's floors, frozen in time. In one restricted area beneath the old laundry room, modern radar scans picked up strange shapes. Some said it could be crates of Civil War rifles or old shell casings. Others wondered if the skeletons were real. The truth is, no one knows for sure. What's certain is that these sealed spaces still exist, and they've kept their secrets for over a century. Even as the island changed, its buried past kept surfacing. In the early 1900s, Alcatraz was reborn again, this time as a maximum security federal prison. By 1934, it was no longer a fort or a holding facility. It had become the toughest prison in America. But beneath the new concrete walls were the same old tunnels. During construction, workers stumbled across ancient brick cisterns, bunkers, and stairwells. Some they filled in, others they paved over. The Citadel's lower levels were left in place. So below the prison's D block, the old military dungeon still sat, cold and dark. Tour guides would later call these spaces the dungeons. And for a time, they were actually used as punishment cells. Eventually, they were sealed. But the idea of hidden cells beneath the prison stuck. In the recreation yard, 2 Civil War gun emplacements were simply paved over with fresh cement. The guards didn't know what was underneath. The inmates didn't either, at least not at first. Then came the case of Cell 14D. In 1940, a man was locked into the solitary cell for misbehavior. Hours later, he began screaming. He said something was in the dark with him, glowing eyes, watching. The guards ignored him. They were used to panic attacks. But the screams continued into the night. Then they stopped. When they opened the cell in the morning, the prisoner was dead. His face was twisted in terror. His throat showed bruises from strangulation, but the cell had been locked. The guards swore they hadn't touched him. No other inmate could have gotten in. Warden Johnston wasn't superstitious, but even he was disturbed. He shut the cell. A priest was brought in to bless the area. The walls were repainted, but red stains kept bleeding through. Some whispered that the old spirits of Alcatraz had claimed someone, that maybe the prisoner in 14D hadn't been alone after all. Not all sealed spaces were cursed. Some were just leftovers. The utility corridors in the prison often ran through 19th century structures. A tight maintenance shaft behind B block had started as a drainage tunnel. By the 1960s, it had become famous. That was the tunnel 3 men used in their legendary escape attempt. But more on that later. In the 1930s, it was just a forgotten space. But guards already knew the understructure was a problem. Warden Johnston wrote in a memo that they kept discovering new holes every year. He said the place was a maze, and sometimes that maze turned up danger. In the mid-1930s, workers digging for a new utility tunnel accidentally opened a sealed brick chamber. Inside were live Civil War-era artillery shells. They'd been sitting there since the 1860s. The Army quietly removed them. No one reported it to the press, but the guards never stopped talking about it. Some joked about treasure buried under the prison yard. Others didn't laugh. The dangers were real. In 1946, during the infamous Battle of Alcatraz, inmates started a full-scale riot. The Navy and Marines were called in. Gunfire and grenades tore through the cell house. In the chaos, some prisoners escaped into old basements and crawl spaces. When the dust settled, guards searched every inch. Inside a sealed ventilation duct, they found a hidden stash of weapons, wrenches, shanks, iron rods. The duct had been forgotten by the prison staff, but not by the inmates. After that, officials welded doors shut and sealed off more rooms. By the late 1940s, nearly every old tunnel and magazine had been either repurposed, buried, or sealed with concrete. The prison had closed off its past to protect its present, but the secrets were never gone. Because, as time would prove, Alcatraz's sealed rooms still had a role to play, especially in 1962, when 3 men vanished into its walls and were never seen again. On the night of June 11, 1962, 3 inmates pulled off something that had never been done before at Alcatraz. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, managed to escape what was supposed to be the most escape-proof prison in America. But the way they did it wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet, hidden, and built around parts of the prison most guards didn't even think about. For months, they'd been digging at the walls behind their sinks using stolen spoons and a homemade drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor. They weren't guessing where to dig. Each of their cells backed into a forgotten utility corridor, an old maintenance shaft that hadn't been in use for decades. The concrete between their cells and that corridor was soft and crumbly, partly sand, partly cement, already eroding from age. That gave them an edge. They worked silently, night after night. Morris even played his accordion to cover the sound of the chipping. It wasn't just effort, it was patience. They kept at it for over 6 months. Behind those cell walls was a narrow, dusty passage filled with old pipes and tangled wiring, just 3 feet wide. It had once been a drainage tunnel during the military years. Guards never went there, and it was still connected to the ventilation system that led all the way to the roof. Once they broke through, they climbed the 30-foot shaft inside the corridor, using the old pipes as a ladder. To keep the guards fooled during the regular nighttime checks, they made dummy heads using plaster, soap, paint, and real hair from the barber shop. These decoys looked so real that when guards passed their cells at 3 a.m., they saw what looked like sleeping inmates and moved on. By the time anyone realized something was wrong at morning roll call on June 12th, they were already gone. They reached the roof, then climbed down a drain pipe near the shower building and headed to the shoreline on the northeast side. That spot wasn't random. It was a quiet area once used for an old cannon base. It's where they had hidden their escape gear. Weeks before the breakout, they had secretly built a raft out of raincoats, sealing the rubber by hand and using heat to bind it. That night, around 10 p.m., they carried it into the cold bay. Morris, who understood navigation, had studied the tides. He knew they had a small window when the outgoing current would carry them toward the Marin Headlands or Angel Island instead of pulling them out to sea. Scientific studies decades later backed this up. A hydrodynamic simulation done in 2014 by Dutch researchers showed that if they launched between 11 and midnight, they had a real chance of reaching land. Any earlier or later, and they would have been swept into the open ocean. Investigators now believe they pushed off around 11:30 p.m., right in that survival window. The next few days were chaos. A massive manhunt swept across the bay. Helicopters, patrol boats, and soldiers searched the water and coastline. On June 14th, the Coast Guard found a wooden paddle floating near Angel Island. That same day, a wallet wrapped in plastic was pulled from the water. Inside were photographs and contact details for the Anglin's family and friends. Stuff someone would only carry if they planned to start over somewhere new. On June 21st, pieces of raincoat rubber washed ashore not far from the Golden Gate. And on June 22nd, a deflated life vest made from the same stolen raincoats was found just 50 yards off Alcatraz. But no bodies ever turned up. The FBI claimed the men had drowned, but the U.S. Marshals kept the case open. Officially, the three were still fugitives. In 2013, something strange happened. A letter arrived, and in 2018 it was revealed to the public. It was supposedly written by John Anglin. He said he was alive, 83 years old, and had cancer. He claimed Morris died in 2008, Clarence in 2011. He even offered to turn himself in if he could get medical help. The FBI tested the letter, but never confirmed if it was real. The mystery deepened in 2015, when the Anglin family shared a photo they'd been holding on to. It showed two middle-aged men in Brazil, taken in 1975. They looked exactly like the Anglin brothers. According to the family, a friend had seen them in Rio and secretly took the photo. Years later, a retired U.S. Marshal ordered a forensic analysis. The result? The photo was very likely authentic. If it was, that means the escape worked, and the brothers lived free for decades. Even now in 2025, the Marshals Service lists them as wanted men. They'd be nearly 95 today. Many believe the escape succeeded because of that hidden corridor behind the cells, something left over from the 1930s that wasn't even supposed to be part of the prison's design. It linked into forgotten military tunnels and gave the men a direct path to the roof and beyond. They chose their moment perfectly, and some even think they had help from the outside, possibly from old criminal contacts, or maybe even from inside the prison. One theory even says Al Capone bribed guards to help them escape, though Capone had been gone from Alcatraz for years by then. Still, the idea keeps coming up. In the end, that escape proved Alcatraz wasn't as escape-proof as everyone thought. The prison closed down the following year in 1963. And yet, all these years later, no one knows for sure what happened to Morris and the Anglins. Maybe they drowned. Maybe they lived in secret under new names. Maybe they really did walk away from the rock. As Ranger John Cantwell once said, "If any prison could have ghosts, Alcatraz would, and maybe those three are among them." And even though the escape story alone feels almost impossible to top, new stories have taken root. In 2025, a strange rumor started spreading online. It claimed that divers had found a sealed underwater capsule somewhere between Alcatraz and Angel Island. The story said it contained the preserved bodies of the escapees and top-secret documents with CIA stamps. Millions of people watched videos about it, but none of it was true. The rumor had likely come from a misreading of that same 2014 tidal study. That study never involved sonar or scanning the ocean floor. It was just a model for currents. Still, that didn't stop people from saying a hidden capsule had been found in a seabed dip. They claimed it had mummified bodies in 1960s clothing and documents in plastic bags, even notes signed by J. Edgar Hoover. It sounded like something from a movie, and that's all it was. The National Park Service denied it. No divers ever reported finding anything close to that. In fact, the waters around the island have been explored over and over by hobbyists and scientists. All they've found is debris, rocks, broken parts from old ships, maybe the occasional tool. Nothing remotely close to a steel vault with bodies. What's more, science proves that the bay's cold, salty water and marine life would never preserve a body like a mummy. And if there was a metal capsule, it would have shown up on the sonar scans done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But still, the myth spread. And part of the reason it stuck was because Alcatraz had real military structures near sea level. There were storm drains and low tunnels from the fort days, some of which got flooded over time. A few were sealed off by the 1930s, including one on the island's northern edge. Treasure hunters probably heard of these and imagined something more. Some artifacts were found underwater, like a ring of keys pulled from near the Model Industries building in 2019. Divers also recovered rusted padlocks and even an old hand crank siren in shallow waters. These things were real, and they hinted at Alcatraz's long history. But they didn't point to any secret chamber. Still, the internet couldn't help itself. Some even said a submarine picked up the escapees, either funded by the mob or sent by the CIA. Of course, there's no proof. And it doesn't fit with the actual clues, like the bits of raft, the photos, and the wallet that floated to shore. No part of Alcatraz terrified inmates more than D Block. It was the section where the worst punishments were carried out, and even the guards treated it with quiet caution. Among the 42 cells, the last 6 were known simply as the Hole. These weren't just solitary cells, they were cold, dark concrete boxes with nothing inside except a hole in the floor for a toilet. Inmates locked inside sometimes stayed there for weeks, cut off from all light, sound, and human contact. Some of them came out broken. Some didn't come out at all. Back in the 1940s, there was an incident that changed how even the staff looked at D Block. An inmate reportedly died after screaming about a ghost in cell 14D. Ever since, that specific cell has been tied to chilling rumors. In the 1950s, someone scrawled a phrase on the wall in Spanish, "Yada yadme," which meant, "Let me go now." Nobody knows exactly what he meant, but many believe he was begging something invisible to release him. Some guards refused to do head counts alone in that cell. They said it was colder than the rest. They said something didn't feel right in there. At one point, Warden James Johnston even had the cell welded shut. That wasn't common procedure. But after a strange strangulation incident inside, he closed it off for months until the Bureau of Prisons forced him to reopen it. They didn't like cells going unused, but the fear surrounding 14D didn't fade. Stories from guards, inmates, even tourists, decades later, kept it alive. There's a quiet legend that Al Capone himself couldn't bear the place. Though usually in general population, he was once sent to isolation and reportedly had a breakdown. He asked to play his banjo in the shower room just so he wouldn't have to sit alone in the dark. There's also a faint carving found years later. "May God have mercy on Al Capone," etched into a wall and now mostly covered in paint. Some believe they can still see the letters A and C scratched faintly on the surface. During renovations decades later, layers of paint were peeled off the old cell walls. That's when the Park Service found what inmates had left behind. There were crude messages like, I tried, dated December 3, 1947, and dozens of scratched tick marks next to the words, "No food." These were resealed for preservation, but they offered a raw, unfiltered look into the minds of the men who were locked away. D Block wasn't just physically sealed, it sealed up the stories, the trauma, and the desperation of the people trapped there. What most visitors never realize is that underneath D Block lies something older, something built before the prison even existed. In the 1800s, back when Alcatraz was still a military fortress, that basement was used as a holding area for military prisoners. It was like a dungeon, crude, damp, and nearly forgotten. But in 2019, during a routine structural inspection, workers opened a rusted hatch in the D Block floor and found a crawl space. Inside were objects that hadn't seen the light in decades. There were iron shackles, a wooden yoke, and mixed in among these were 20th century items, leg irons, and what looked like an old electric prod. These weren't museum pieces. They were real tools of punishment, left behind like someone had something to hide. This discovery hit a nerve. Back in the late 1930s, Alcatraz had been investigated for brutality. Warden Johnston denied everything, but this hidden stash seemed to suggest otherwise. The objects were removed quietly and archived, but they confirmed something inmates had been saying for years. D Block had always been a place of torture, first for soldiers, then for federal prisoners. 2 different centuries, same purpose. Even now, the ghost stories don't stop. Cold spots are often reported, especially in cell 14D. Thermometers have shown that cell can be 20 degrees colder than others, even when everything else is warm. Some blame its low location. Others aren't so sure. In 2022, a paranormal investigation team got permission to spend the night in D Block. They placed audio recorders and motion sensors throughout the corridor. What they caught sent chills down the spines of even the skeptics. One voice recorder captured what sounded like a deep whisper in cell 12D. After cleaning up the audio, they heard 2 chilling words: "Get out." That same night, motion detectors picked up strange movements in the hallway. Nobody else was on that tier. And the sensors had gone off right near a sealed entrance to an old corridor that had been closed since the 1930s. The stories go back decades. In the 1940s, guards claimed to see a figure in 1800s prison uniform silently walking through the hallway, disappearing before their eyes. One guard even fired his gun at the shadow, believing it was a real escapee, but nobody was there. After the prison shut down in 1963, rangers continued to report sobbing or low moaning echoing through D Block at night. People say pain leaves a mark. If that's true, then D Block is soaked in it. The architecture alone makes you shiver. Steel doors with no windows. No light unless the guards allowed it. In the oriental dark cell, they could even turn off the bulb from the outside, trapping the prisoner in total blackness for days. The psychological toll of that kind of punishment is hard to measure. Some prisoners never recovered. Some never left alive. Henry Young was one of them. He murdered another inmate after long months in the hole. He claimed it was the isolation that broke him. His story became the basis for the movie Murder in the First. The cell may be empty now, but the air still feels heavy. In the modern era, the ghosts haven't vanished. They've just gone digital. Starting in 2023, geospatial engineer Pete Kelsey led the most advanced scanning project ever attempted on Alcatraz. His team used drones, LiDAR scanners, and even a robot dog to explore every inch of the island. By 2024, they had created a full 3D model, a digital twin of the entire prison. The goal was preservation, but what they found went far beyond structural maps. Behind several walls, the scans showed hollow spaces that weren't on any blueprints. One of them, near the Sally Port, built in 1857, turned out to be a sealed guard room that hadn't been opened in over a century. In early 2025, a small section of wall was carefully removed. Inside, they found piles of dust-covered items, empty bottles, old shoes, and most surprising of all, a stack of uniforms. There were guard outfits from the 1940s and military jackets from the 1910s. It looked like someone had been using it as storage and then forgot it existed. But the weirdest part of the scan came from the basement under the warden's office. That's where their equipment started to malfunction. A strange electromagnetic field was interfering with sensors and drones. The spot didn't match any official plans. Some suggested it was an old vault. Others wondered about Cold War experiments. In the 1950s, the Navy had tested jamming devices. Could one have been left behind? Nobody knows for sure. For now, the floor hasn't been opened. The scan data also helped investigators retrace the famous 1962 escape. By rebuilding the exact route taken by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, they found something new: a narrow crevice on the northeast cliff, right where the escapees would have descended. Inside that crevice, park rangers found bones in 2025. For a moment, it sparked headlines, but they turned out to be bird bones, possibly from a seabird nest or even an old prison meal. Still, the escape now seemed even more daring. Tide models showed the men had less than 30 minutes to get clear of the current. Any delay could have meant being dragged under the Golden Gate. Thermal scans also revealed more secrets buried in the island's ground. One scan showed a perfect square-shaped cold spot near the lighthouse. It matched an old record of a buried shell room. Some thought it might be a leftover magazine from the fort days, but others pointed out that it sat near a spot tied to Native American legends. The Ohlone tribe considered Alcatraz a place of exile. One of the graffiti marks inside the prison even looked like an indigenous symbol, warning of cursed ground. In that same area, psychics brought in by television crews claimed they felt ancient sorrow. One thing is certain: the scans revealed 2 sealed ammo bunkers under the old parade ground. They're likely filled with inert ordnance now, but they're being closely watched. It's not just a precaution. In 2022, a live World War II grenade was found during sewer repairs. It had to be detonated. Since then, the Park Service has quietly run evacuation drills in case more explosives are discovered.